through to number 10 on our order paper, and that's around the rating system for 25-26. And I'll invite Steve Patterson up, to present this, page 293 of your papers, councillors. Steve.
Yes, good afternoon, Mayor and councillors. As you know, it's about 45 years since I started presenting reports about this sort of thing into the council chambers, so it's something that I've done for a long time, but the thing that never ceases to amaze me is that there's sort of no right answer to the way in which rates will be set in the end, and it's a matter for the council to determine how the rates will be set and what's most appropriate for the city. And so no matter what part I can play in the process, it's about trying to provide you with information, the best information I can, in order to help you gauge the impacts of decisions that you might end up making. Because I recognise that without me trying to do that for you, you're left in a quandary as to what is the best. So, and I recognise that my view or approach about things is not necessarily what you might feel about something in terms of what's fair and appropriate, but and I try not to let any personal preferences or whatever to come into the way in which I advise you, but inevitably in getting to the point where we are in the process, I've had to make quite a few calls about some things because there's just an infinite number of variables and possibilities in terms of the way things are done. So in order to get to this point, you have to put a few stakes in the ground about things that we all agree on and which are the principles upon which the decision's made. And some of those principles are encapsulated in the revenue and financing policy, some of them in the broader rating stuff that you have traditionally done. Some of them are things that you've considered as part of the rating review. Not all councils come to the same view in the end about what they think is appropriate, and that's sensible to a degree because each council is made up of different components, like the ratio of capital to land, capital to the ratio of residential to non-residential properties, how many there are of each and how big they are, and whether there's a prevailing very big one in the mix that muddies the water for the comparison. So in our case, over these years, the city's obviously grown, and so the pressure points often become around the fringe of the city as to what's happening there, and values progressively change and the nature of use changes. And so in thinking about the rates and what's appropriate, I reported to you back in December following the latest revaluation. And obviously in terms of the path that you set on in implementing the capital value portion of the rates, the revaluation muddies the water to a degree in terms of understanding what's driving the change in any rates incidents. So, as you're all familiar with, but I will repeat it, that the rates incidence for individual ratepayers is driven by several things. One's on the property itself and what it's used for. The second is in terms of that property, whether there's been some further development on the property compared with the previous year, either that would increase the value of the home or extended building or something that would increase the value. And that component, the bit about the any capital additions that add value, the rate to the rateable value, is a component we haven't really to think about too much in the past in this council because we haven't had a capital value component to the rates, so it hasn't really mattered to us in setting the rates. has mattered to Horizons because they have had, a capital value component to their rates since they were formed. The next things that impact on the level of the rates are the charges that we make for individual services. And in our case, we've got fixed targeted rates for the water, the wastewater, the rubbish and public recycling, and for the curbside recycling. And so in each of those cases, the properties that become serviced or change from serviceable to serviced in a particular year because they're connected, obviously will get a significant change in the level of rates. And in some cases, the availability of the wastewater service to a property that hasn't previously had it will mean that its differential classification might change from being a rural unserviced or semi-serviced property to a serviced property. And if that happens, it could be they go from quite a low rate as a rural sort of rate to something that's much, much higher depending on the nature of the use. And we have this period where that evolution will happen. And there's quite a bit of that going on the fringes of the city at the moment, where properties are moving from being at a relatively low rate to something much higher, depending on the nature of the use. And so part of our process of administering the rating system, which is a tax system, and therefore we've got to be pretty careful about making sure everything's consistently done, is to look at where all those changes are happening and trying to keep our rating information database up to date with all that. And, so we're putting a bit of emphasis on that right at the moment because of the nature of the change. So besides those things then the level of the uniform charge that we might choose to impose. And as I've said in the report, each time I've reported to you, the law prescribes that there is a maxima for what that can be. And it's a funny calculation because it excludes the water and the wastewater charges from the calculation. But anyway, it's described as being 30% of a sum that you can't charge above. Now, at one point, for several years, many years ago, we were sitting around about 25% of that maximum. So our UAGC got up as high as $690. Then progressively councils have determined to reduce that down to the present level of 200, and we're sitting in the, from memory, 8 to 10% category now in that formal legislative calculation that's done. Which means that if the council chose to do so, it could legally increase that quite a lot more. I doubt that you would want to do that, but that would be something that could be done legally. The uniform annual general charge is then a lever that is used to try to ensure that those at the either end of the scale usually pay what might be seen as a reasonable, fair, I don't know what, equal, it depends what word you use, share of the rates. And it recognises that the value alone isn't necessarily the thing that's going to give the right answer, because there's nothing particularly magic about the value that says that it's a good way of distributing the rates. It is the prime way we use and has been recognised through your change process as having these various elements to it, both the land and the capital. The next thing that affects the rates incidence, of course, is the nature of the differential rating system. And so the council introduced a differential rating system many, many years ago, and it became, well, it was when the law first changed to allow that to happen, actually, back in the late 1970s. And so most councils use some form of differential rating system as a way of trying to recognise that the value itself is not necessarily the only in combination with fixed charges, not necessarily going to give the answer you want either in terms of what's the fairest way of distributing the rate burden. So all of those things then lead us to the point where we have before us now, you asked me to come back as a result of what I'd recommended to you back in December with some options. The options, I've called them scenarios. I called them scenarios back in December because at that time I wasn't proposing any one in particular. And this time I've still called them scenarios because it's your choice, really, about what happens. And there's still, so the various levers that you pull will have obviously differing impacts. And it's a judgment call in the end as to what's the most appropriate lever or series of levers to pull in order to, I suppose, walk this difficult path that we have to walk about what's an appropriate way of sharing the rates across the citizens of the city. And so the scenarios that I put in front of you are not too much different in many respects from what was said back in December. You will have seen that broadly I've got two different types of scenarios. I've got one series of three, the first three, which assume no real change to the differential surcharges, except for the lifestyle type ROCs, where the council decided that we'd have a 2-year implementation of that. So those first three scenarios make that assumption, those series of assumptions, and there's one with a 200, one with a 300, and one with a $400 UAGC. You can see the effect on the total incident rates, I mean, for what the groups pay from what's said in the report. And as was mentioned back in December, that basically means there's a very significant movement of the rates from the residential to the commercial sector, and to a lesser degree to some of the other sectors as well. So I guess in light of that, I'd suggested to you that I needed to come back with more scenarios, and so I've got the next 4 scenarios, 4 to 7 here. And scenarios 4 through 6 all make the same assumptions about the level of the differential. And I've fiddled around with that a lot in the modelling to try to say, well, what sort of outcome are we looking to try to generate here, and what effect would it have on both the total rates from the group and the individual ratepayers? Obviously, as I said, there's an infinite number of combinations, but in the end, had to try to say, well, what might drive the decision about what's the most appropriate? And that's your call in the end, but for me to come back to you with something, I've had to make some calls, which I'll share in a moment. Those, then I said to myself, well, what other scenario might we have? And there's a 7th one which makes a slightly different assumption about the level of the surcharge, of the differentials. So late last night I sent you some information, some additional information as well. I'm sorry it ended up being as late as that, but I got sidetracked from another question in the morning which I spent some time on, so both of those ones is stuff that I sent yesterday. One addresses, I guess, over time, what proportion of the whole city is land value is commercial and residential, etc., and what proportion of the rates has there been that's been shared by those. And that's an important thing that I've sort of kept track of over the years to try to understand what I might be recommending to you. If there's been a significant growth in one sector, then it might be reasonable that they should be paying a greater share of the rates. But the thing that sort of intrigues me a bit over time, when you look back all those years, is that there's not been a huge change, really, that's that significant in the composition and the total amount of each of those sectors relative to the whole. It's been pretty consistent right through the last, I don't know, 15 to 20 years. So that has meant, and despite the ups and downs a bit over time, when there's been significant movements in one sector or the other, the council's slightly adjusted the rating system in order to mean that the totals being paid by those sectors have remained reasonably consistent as well over that time. And so you recall the last revaluation, you chose where land and capital values for the residential sector rose significantly. You decided to moderate the effect of that by increasing the differentials for commercial properties and lowering the UAGC. And so that was done with several things in mind. One was to sort of, because it was thought that the total that came from each of those sectors would be one of the drivers as to how we went about setting the differentials. And the second was, I think, if I can read the room at the time, was the potential impact on those residential ratepayers of the increases that would have happened if we'd allowed all the valuations to run through without some intervention. So I guess in the end then this report is showing you the impact in terms of movements. It's making the assumption the rates in total will increase by 8.5%, but as you know, you've resolved this morning that it'll be a bit less than that, but that broadly will still be the same sort of, roughly the same picture you'll see in rates incidence as is reflected in this report. I personally don't have any preference, if you like, for what level of uniform charge you decide is appropriate. But in making that call, I think it's a matter of saying, well, what impact does that have in terms of where the total rates from a sector will fall, and if you put it up in any way, will it make the resulting residential rates in particular unreasonably high at the lower end of values? Now, one of the things that's happened in the revaluation is that the reduction in values for residential has been not at the same percentage across the board, but more in the same dollar amounts, if you like. So somewhere between 100 and 150,000 seems to have been a common sort of amount of reduction. So what concerned us 3 years ago when we made the changes was that some of the lower valued residential properties were going up lots because developers were buying them up to subdivide. But that's not happening to the same degree now. And so there isn't that same premium on those large, lower value, what were lower value properties, and they've now reduced. So the need to have a concern about that in terms of either the differential or the uniform charge is not as significant as it was, in my opinion, 3 years ago. So for me, that's one of the things just to keep in mind a little bit in terms of thinking about it. Another is that the uniform charge is this mechanism that if in the future something happens, that you need to be able to have a vehicle for moderating in some way, then if the UAGC is as low as it is, you can go a little bit further, but not a lot further. But if it is a bit higher than it is now, it gives some flexibility in the future to use that as a tool for adjusting the incidence in the future. In theory, if you think 3 years' time, when the next revaluation comes round, if things go as they're tracking at the moment, the council won't have its water services as part of its rating structure. Ratepayers will still be paying for the water services in some way. At the moment, the stormwater charge is part of what's the general rate, charged based on the land value. So it's going to be interesting to see how we evolve in terms of that. But the stormwater component of some commercial rates is very high because it's part of the general rate and then has the differential on top of it. So for them, in terms of the incidents going forward, when they're part of a different entity, it'll be really interesting just to quite see how that's going to work. And it will mean quite a change in incidents potentially of rates. So we are going to have to think quite hard about the rating incidents with the removal of the waters from the activity, thinking, well, starting to think about it soon, really, for the future. But for now, if we're thinking about where we're heading from this year, 25, 26, into 26, 27, the immediate thing that will happen for next year again is the third year of the implementation of the capital value and the reduction of that land value. So that is something, obviously, we have to keep in mind about what the effect's going to be. And there'll presumably be some small rates increase of whatever level that the LTP at the moment suggests is around about 8% increase in the following year. But because you've changed the base a lot by reducing this, who knows what it'll be in the third year now. So all of those elements there make this a tricky decision, as I said. I am suggesting to you, though, that from my perspective, the differentials probably at the levels that I've suggested here are my best professional judgment about what might give an answer that's palatable to everybody. You could fiddle around with them a little bit, but they're rounded for a reason. They're rounded at these figures because there's no absolute right answer, and I don't think you get any benefit from trying to artificially make these, say, instead of being 100%, 98 or 97 or 96 or something silly. Well, not silly, different than that. They're an artificial number. They are designed to just reflect that we're making subjective calls about what's an appropriate way of allocating the rates across ratepayers. That's me.
Thank you, Steve. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Steve. So would it be fair to say that your interpretation of the problem that we've been presented by the revaluations is that the revaluations transfer $11 million worth of rate paying onto the commercial sector from the residential sector? Is that the problem that you're trying to solve with these scenarios that you've put forward?
Basically, yes. There are probably one or two other underlying small things, but that's the primary one. And I think it's probably appropriate for some transfer to the commercial sector, representing some of the growth that's happening. But I guess when you look at the percentages that there are of the total, it's not that much in total, that growth. And I think if you think deep down in terms of what justifies charging a differential of 3 or 4 times the residential rate on the value to a commercial sector, you have to be very conscious of the fact that at some point, and I'm not suggesting this is the case where we're at, but these decisions about what's appropriate and what's sensible times of contested court, when if they become unreasonable and so we just got to be a little bit conscious of the extent of the surcharge for the commercial and why we have it, is my concern.
So we don't have a surcharge of 300 to 400% on commercial, do we?
Yes, well, it depends how you describe it. The surcharge of commercial at the moment is 200%. It's a surcharge of 200, which means that they get 3 times the rate in the dollar of the of the miscellaneous rate, which actually works out to about 3.8 times the residential rate.
So it's not a
So if you-
surcharge of
if
300%,
you
though,
looked
is
in
it?
the rate and the dollar and did that calculation, it will work out. It's described slightly differently. It's described as 200, described as 200% surcharge on top of the rate. So
Okay.
that works out to 300. It's 3 times effectively.
Yeah, but it's not a 200% surcharge. Oh, sorry, it's not a 3 to 400% surcharge, is it?
But it's 3 times the rate of the miscellaneous category and 3.8 times the residential category.
Okay, but a minute ago, you said we have to be careful because if we're doing surcharges of 300 to 400%, that can be tested in the courts. And I'm questioning your statement there that we don't actually have any 300 to 400% surcharges.
No, we don't. Expressed that way, we don't. It's just that you need to be careful about, well, I need to be careful, and everybody needs to understand that the rate in the dollar per dollar of capital or land value, in the case of the commercial, for the land value component, is either 3 times the residential rate at the moment for the current year, or 3.8, I think it is, times what the residential single unit rate is.
Okay, so when we explain to residents or to ratepayers in general how we're apportioning the rates, we say that it's based on the slice of the pie, if you like, that their particular property represents, or in this case, if we're taking a bigger view, the slice of the pie that residential represents versus the slice of the pie that commercial represents. But in actual fact, it's not that, is it? Because we are manipulating that with the differentials.
Yeah, our differential system doesn't have as a stated objective obtaining any particular percentage from each category. The law allows us either to state it in that way or to state it as being one where you've got a ratio compared with the other ones. And so in our case, it's always been the case that we've stated it in the form that we have. But one of the tests that we've done is to look at the proportion that's coming from that sector as one of the mechanisms we've got for thinking about how much is appropriate to charge to that sector. As I said, it's not a stated objective of our scheme to actually have a certain proportion coming from that sector.
I guess what I'm struggling with is the answer I might give to a residential ratepayer who comes to me to say, why, when our valuations as a sector dropped, did you make our rates subsidise the commercial sector so that they would pay less? Because that, in effect, is what you're suggesting through some of these differentials, isn't it?
I guess my answer would be the same as, why did we put yours down last time and make the commercial ones pay more when the reverse happened?
Well, they didn't pay less last time, did they?
In the last revaluation, we changed the incidence by changing the differentials and the uniform charge so that the residential sector wouldn't bear the full brunt of the changes in the valuations.
So what I guess, where is the cutoff for the amount of subsidisation that you might expect us to approve of the commercial sector from the residential sector?
Well, the reality is the differential system doesn't do that at all. The differential system is benefiting the residential sector entirely. If we didn't have any differential system, the residential people would pay heaps more than what they currently do.
I understand that, Steve, but my
so
question is, why that would be if we started from scratch now with a system where there was nothing.
Yes.
What we're starting from is status quo.
Yes.
And what I'm saying is, given that there's if we went entirely on revaluation, there's a shift of $11 million onto commercial and a little bit rural from residential. where is the guidance anywhere as to how much of that shift we should enable through changing differentials?
In reality, there isn't any guidance legally. It's a decision of the council to decide what the council feels is an appropriate way of distributing the rates burden, I guess. And our council has had this differential system for years and has a combination of other things that it's done in order to drive it. But it's really to write a series of principles that will drive those decisions about the way in which we determine what's fair, because all the components keep changing, and it becomes down to as I said, a gut feeling, a judgment call in the end about what the community and the citizens will live with as the way in which the tax is allocated amongst them. And we, despite my best attempts to try to find ways of describing things that might be objective as ways of testing it, in the end, they're all, I suppose, judgment calls about how we go about distributing in a way that we think is fair. And from time to time, you give guidance about where you think those boundaries need to be shifted a little bit. I think one of the things as well is what we try to do, I mean, obviously every time there's a revaluation of a significant one, any taxing system you'd like to think can have predictability. That's one of the key tenets of any tax system, that people can sort of not be absolutely caught out by it. So in a sense, one of the things we've been trying to do at times is moderate the level of movement we can within the bounds of what the systems and the legislation will allow. But as I said, there's no right answer to any of this. It's all a judgment call, and it is very hard to explain why you might make these series of decisions about what's fair and the way in which it should be allocated. Despite my best attempts, at times I haven't been able to find something that will be absolute, that's going to say you've got to go down this path because this is the answer.
All right, thanks, Steve. I've got others wanting to speak. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Steve. So just for the clarity of those of us who weren't around the table 3 years ago when this happened and the boot was on the other foot, it would be the 2022 to 23 year that the adjustment for differentials was last made, is that correct? Yep. So I can see here, looking at the chart you sent through, from 21 to 22 and 22 to 23, the proportionality for residential stayed exactly the same at 62.8%, is that correct? So effectively we preserved proportionality exactly when that last revaluation happened in terms of residential. I don't need you to confirm the exact numbers, but just the principle that we preserved proportionality exactly.
More or less.
Okay.
I had this.
So how much was the shift 3 years ago? So this year we've got a 7.2% shift away from residential. How much was the shift towards residential last time? Do you recall? Or have a rough idea? Is it akin, or is it a lot less or a lot more?
Talking about the rates shift or the value shift, because in the values 3 years ago, let me just remind myself, so it was 3.6% increase in the residential proportion of the capital value. You'll see in those tables from yesterday.
Okay. That's useful to understand. So in terms of how we make a decision, you've said at some point it could trigger the courts reviewing it, and that has happened in the past. What metrics do the courts take into account when reviewing a decision on fairness? Because for councillors making a decision in an environment where it theoretically could be challenged, surely there must be some legal guidance on what they deem to be fair differentials that we need to be aware of in making this decision.
There are some court cases that go back a very long way, but they basically boil down to an interpretation of what any reasonable person would decide in terms of what's appropriate in the end. There's not really succinct guidance on this, but I know that one of the cases was a case where a council in the South Island set a rate that was for one ratepayer, effectively an electricity dam, and they did that in a way that is an extraordinarily high proportion of the total rates of that council. And the judge's view in that was that that wasn't a reasonable decision. And in the case of Wellington years ago, there was Wellington was taken to court in terms of their decisions about their commercial differential. It's many years ago now, and there was a feeling, I can't remember the exact outcome of that case, but it meant the City Council at the time progressively reduced their commercial differentials to a level that was lower.
Thank you, Steve. We need to be reasonable. Excellent advice. All right.
Councillor Naylor.
Thanks. Just one quick question from me. In scenarios 4, 5 and 6, where it's changes the non-residential LV surcharge from 200 to 150%. 3 years ago, did we put it up from 170 to 200?
Forgotten, to be honest. What we put it up by, I'll have to double check.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry, I can't tell you that.
Yeah, no, that's all right. I was just kind of interested to know if we've, that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter if you can't remember. I was just interested to know what the mechanism was that we used. I know we changed the differentials, but I
think the thing that's slightly different this time is the magnitude of the change is a bit more significant in that swing. I mean, there was quite a swing last time as well, but I think it's actually a bit more significant even this time.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Steve. I think you can call it pulling the levers, can't you? Pull one lever and the other one goes up. You've got to make sure they're all quite balanced. All right, thank you. Okay, recommendations to Council. One, that the Chief Executive incorporate the following rating system assumptions in the draft of the 25-26 annual budget and supporting information and consultation document to be presented for adoption at the Council meeting 5th of March 2025, subject to any amendment. One, continuing the second stage of the implementation of the capital value-based targeted rate. Two, a uniformed or UAG, uniformed annual general charge of either 200, 300 or 400. I'm going to move 300. And number three, that differentials for the rural and semi-serviced of 2 hectares to 5 hectares, differential category with surcharge of -40% for the general rate. Or discount, I'm not sure how we term that, and for the targeted capital value-based rate, and 4 differentials for the non-residential differential category with a surcharge of 150 for the general rate and 100 for the targeted capital value-based rate. And that's it. So I'm happy to move those. It was seconder. Thank you. Councillor Wood. Look, councillors, those that have been around the table a little bit, it's funny how the levers get pulled and one goes up and one goes the other way. You can recall in the last revaluation we did exactly the same to the industrial and the commercial sector, where we wanted to even things out and the differentials were tweaked to, I suppose, harmonise or balance the residential rates. So that's my reasoning around the differentials around the commercial and non-residential. Same with rural and semi-service. I was quite surprised, and a few other councillors got a lot of comments around the LTP, around their movement and their values as well, and increases and potential rates. So there's some tweaking there. I've been around the table for 10 years, and some can remember it was around nearly 700, I think, at one stage for the UAG, and then we're down to 200 But I just draw your attention to 3.10, where it says one of the arguments to reduce the UAGC to 200 following the 21 revaluation was to spread was the spread of residential land value had been reduced through the revaluation, and the reverse has now happened, and the greater reductions in land values have been traditionally lower value. Steve explained that in his rationale earlier. So I'd like to think that we can, again, this is one lever being pulled and the other trying to be balanced in its in making sure that we don't hurt one group really badly. So I'd like to think you could support this. There being no, Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Well, I'd like them separated off because there are some that I'm happy to support and some that I'm not. So I'm not happy to support an increase in the uniform annual general charge because that impacts the households that have the lowest value properties the hardest. It's essentially, that uniform annual general charge is essentially a flat tax that's applied to everybody. So whether your property is worth 500,000 or 5 million, that $300 is payable. And so proportionately, it takes up much more of a lower value properties rates. So one of the reasons that we've worked to reduce it over the years has been to try and make sure that as much of the rates as possible came down to the value of your property, not a flat tax. And as it is, there's already a substantial amount of fixed components to the rates between the water, the wastewater, the rubbish and recycling, etc. So that is all fixed, and the UAGC is on top of that. So I don't support it being increased at all, because the people that will be paying as a result of that are those who have the lower value properties, and I don't think that that's fair. If you can just put it up a bit, I'll go to the next one. Yeah, now, in terms of the differentials for the rural semi-serviced, I think it was generally agreed through the submissions that we had on the long-term plan that we would stage those changes for those people so that they wouldn't have a big change, and so I'm happy to support that. In terms of the differentials for the non-residential category, what that does is it substantially transfers some of the benefits that residential ratepayers will be getting because their properties have reduced in value. It transfers that onto the commercial sector, and it's essentially a subsidy from residential ratepayers to the commercial sector. Now, as Steve said, you know, whether you agree with that or not is just your own subjective opinion. But I think that given that there's been quite a lot of talk, both inside and outside the chamber, of the effect of rates on residential ratepayers and how they're struggling, that where we have the valuation coming out confirming what most people already knew, that their properties had dropped in value, and where that hasn't been accompanied by a drop in value in the commercial sector, in fact quite the opposite, their values have increased, I don't see why we should expect the residential sector to continue to pay the same proportion of rates that they've always paid when their values have dropped and the commercial sectors have risen. So I'm not going to support number 4. I do think that our approach to how we think rates should be levied or not obviously varies from person to person. But I know that when residential ratepayers are struggling to pay their rates because of all of the extra costs that have come onto them, and they come in and say, well, is there anything you can do about it? And we say, no, that's not actually true, because we could decline to do this transfer from residential to commercial, and that would give them quite a bit of relief. Now, I'm sure there'll be people around the table who say, oh, no, Lorna, that's just being anti-business. we need to support business, etc. Business is struggling at the moment. I 100% recognise that business is struggling at the moment. But if business is struggling at the moment, it's because of the fact that the government has tanked the economy, not because of our rates. So I would be quite firm in saying that we shouldn't be expecting our residential ratepayers to give a substantial subsidy over to business, and I hope you would also agree with that. So if either of those fail, I'll put up the opposites.
Yeah, Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to support all the recommendations before us and speak to them more generally. I just want to acknowledge the presentation last week from Kiwi Property about the request to move the transition to the capital value to even slower than what we agreed. And I don't, at this stage, think that's appropriate after the extensive consultation we went and the length of the debate that we had to actually propose something that was moving slower to the capital value, which was originally proposed at 30/70 as a split in a one-year move. So I'm very comfortable with continuing on with this approach with the move to capital value. The other aspects around the uniform annual general charge, I really feel that we need to move that up and give some softening to some of the upper areas of our rating base and to moderate the effect of the move. So I'm very comfortable. I don't see a $100 movement as being too significant in light of the dynamic environment we are with valuations and the change to capital and the rates that are proposed to be allocated. Now, the last point I wanted to say around the non-residential, I also think it's fair. We made the shift last time and to adjust for the residential because of the large increases of the valuations. I think it's only fair that we have a mind to consider adjusting back somewhat in the changing dynamic each 3-year period. And otherwise, to me, it seems like we're giving the residential sector a whole range of sweets one year and then can't take a little bit of the cake another year. It's kind of like, it's just like give, and yet the business community, it's not all roses for them. In fact, we've had Kiwi Property saying, you know, it's tough. You know, they're going to have an impact that they were suggesting of around 500,000 as an increase to what they currently pay in rates. There'll be other businesses that will be quite a large percentage, and when we know that economic times have been quite challenging, I think it's actually fair to give mind to actually what feeds a lot of households is the strength of the economic sector, so, and the business sector. And so, therefore, I've got a large degree of comfort going out. This, of course, is the draft plan. We're going out for consultation, and we'll get views, and we'll get the chance to adjust accordingly before the new financial year. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's important in this debate to point out that every single one of the scenarios in front of us, there is a shift from residential onto commercial. So none of these scenarios are suggesting that we take money from the residential sector to subsidise commercial. It's a degree to how much benefit the residential sector gains from this revaluation. So I think that's an important starting point for us to have. From Steve's commentary, as he said, there is no framework for determining particular answers. So as in each individual council, we have their own framework, how we make that determination in this situation. And for me, in light of there being no good answer, preserving proportionality is the best way, in my eyes, we can honour the deal that we have with our community. When you buy a property or start a business or whatever it may be, that you expect that your rates will increase or decrease ever so slightly, either up or down in any given year. At the moment, there are 3 factors impacting the rates that an individual or business may pay. One is the shift from land value to a mixed model system. One is the rate increases, and the other is the revaluations. And councillors know in any given year of revaluations, that alone is enough of a shift to put incredible amounts of confusion out into our community, let alone layering onto that a mixed model shift, let alone layering onto that rate increases. So I think it would be not in our interest to see significant shifts and cause significant anomalies in our rate system if we simply stuck with the status quo. Residential under the do-nothing approach, just leave it as is, would see a 7.2% shift away from their sector, and commercial would see a 6.3% shift onto their sector. Noting that last time we had revaluations, a 3.6% shift to residential was enough to trigger council to change the proportionality and the differentials to account for that. So if 3.6 to residential is enough to trigger that shift, then I think 6.3% going on to commercial is enough to trigger this conversation we're having now. I think that's fair. Under scenario 5 that the Mayor's proposed, there would still be a 2.3% shift away from residential. So in terms of proportion residential pay, it would still be 2.3% less of the pie, and commercial would still pay 1.4% more of the pie. So there is still some recognition of the change in valuation that wasn't afforded last time there was a valuation. But as Steve said, the volume of this shift is larger than what we saw 3 years ago. I would note commercial values have dropped, industrial values have increased slightly. So it's not simply a flat case that all commercial values have either gone up or down. It was delineated, I recall, in the report we received, I think it was in December, that commercial values have dropped. I would note in the data that we were provided around historic proportionality, never before, I say never before, it's never before since 2010, has residential's share gone below 59%, and very rarely has it gone below 60%. By doing nothing, residential would go down to 54.7. Never before has commercial gone above 29.2%, and it's been a long time since it was above 28%. In this approach, if we weren't to adopt this, it would be 32.4. So I think in a sense of fairness and honouring the deal that we make with our community, accepting that everybody is aware their rates may go up or down slightly in any given year, and accepting significant shifts we're already putting on ratepayers due to the shift from a land value to a mixed value system, I think it would be unfair to add another significant shift in proportionality onto that. So I hope that councillors can see this as a fair reflection of the change in valuation. The residential will still benefit, commercial will still pay more, but it is a moderated and a balanced approach that protects all of our ratepayers in our community, residential or non-residential.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and colleagues, and appreciate the comments made so far from elected members around their perspectives on it. My view in general around the matters that we face is that happy to broadly maintain the kind of proportions that we've historically set out amongst or seen develop amongst commercial versus residential share. The question that I think we need to face much more squarely is which of the levers do we actually pull to achieve that in a way that actually recognizes the impact that rates have, particularly on those with the least ability to pay rates. And we should not fall into the trap of thinking that differentials are the same kind of lever that the UAGC is. Differentials are very useful for keeping that broad balance between categories without actually setting out something that disproportionately impacts those with the least ability to pay. On the other hand, the UAGC does exactly that. It pushes a greater proportion of costs onto those with the least ability to pay. So my preference in terms of where this would go is that we do broadly maintain those proportions, but that we do by pulling on the differentials lever rather than the UAGC. So I'll be voting against a $300. I think it's very unfair, particularly in year whatever we are of a cost of living crisis, to then go and throw another $100 of flat tax onto those that have the least ability to meet that obligation, i.e. those that are in general in the lower part of the property market, whether they be renting and paying rates as renters, or whether they be owners and paying rates as owners. It would be much, much preferable for us to pull a bit harder on the differentials in order to maintain a semblance of balance, and would urge colleagues to take that approach. So please vote against the 300 UAGC with a view to going to 200, and then we can have a conversation about whether we need to pull a bit harder on the differentials or not. Thank you.
All right, just as right a reply, look, thanks for your comments. And look, I guess people would have their positions as they've traditionally had for many, many years. But we have to be fair and balanced, and it's all sectors of our community as well. We don't want to be a city that has cheap residential rates, but there's no jobs. All the businesses have left. And reality is that, you know, we just got to be careful that we don't become so unattractive to that. And look, in 2021, and the commentary and some of the comments from Steve backed it up. In the last revaluation we did, and I think Councillor Wood explained it better than I can, that we'd already pushed the non-residential, the industrial and the commercial differentials up to balance out the residential side. But I think the scenario 5, is both the UAG and the differentials, remembering it wasn't that long ago that it was $690. So I'm sorry, it has to be both if we're going to get a true balance and harmonisation. I come back to the levers debate. If we only pull one lever, the other thing will still go the other way, and you'll make no difference or very little difference. So please, you've got to make a true balance. You've got to do both. So we'll vote on 1 and 3 first. Thank you. It was passed 15 votes for, none against. And then we'll come to number 1, 2, around the UAG. Can we vote, please? And that is passed, 8 votes for, 7 against. Okay, and then we go to the next one. Which is 1, 4. Your vote, please. It's passed, 14 votes for and 1 against. All right. We move through now to number 11 on our order paper, and that is around submission on the Local Government Water Services Bill. And invite Julie Keane, Mike Monaghan up. Thank you. Page 317 of your papers.
Good afternoon and thank you, your worship and councillors. We're bringing to you today the submission for the Water Services Bill, or Bill 3 as we affectionately refer to it now. Council will remember before Christmas, you passed a resolution that this could be signed under delegation by the Mayor and the CE. However, due to the extended consultation period, it's given us an opportunity to bring this to the table for you today for your consideration, and perhaps an opportunity for us to incorporate any feedback that you may have. Councillors, if you've read the bill, you'll appreciate that there's a high degree of technicality within the 300 pages, and it covers a vast breadth of subject matter. The bill didn't throw up any major surprises for us. Having said that, though, we still believe that we need to submit on a number of areas that were essential to provide PNCC's feedback on. We will take the paper as read, but I'll just highlight a number of those key areas for you to consider. The bill provisions for Maori involvement and treaty obligations are quite limited. So we've made a number of recommendations within our submission to ensure that Maori interests are better represented. And the bill provisions require strengthening in relation to establishing specific deadlines for the preparation of the Statement of Expectations and mandating regular reporting by the water services organisations to ensure that they're meeting their obligations. We recommended in the submission that the skill sets requirements for any directors include essential knowledge of Tikanga Māori, Te Ao Māori and Te Tiriti. This is a complete omission from the draft bill. We've also highlighted a concern that Section 16 of the bill, and that's in the financial principles, and the ring fencing provisions creates an uneven playing field between the CCO options and an in-house business unit. We've also pointed out in the submission the need to ensure alignment between the bill and the city's planned development. We've highlighted the need to improve the bill to ensure future development of the city is not held back by recommending inclusion of key strategic documents such as the City Future Development Strategy. It's been a massive effort from a large number of colleagues across the organisation, and we've reached out to many subject matter experts to provide this submission. So we're happy to take questions now, noting my little caveat there that we may not be able to answer all the questions between us, but we will reach out to colleagues if we need to. So over to you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors Bellin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tēnā koroa. Thank you for an extremely comprehensive and thorough submission. I did have a couple of questions that that threw up, especially with what our suggestions were, particularly what you were talking about with the alignment with planned growth. And I was wondering about development contributions and development contribution policies. With the removal of water to a different entity, will a new entity be required to have their own development contributions policy, and will that entity also be required to adopt ours? Is that something we have thought about, whether they're adhering to a bunch of different DC policies or whether they're going to consolidate?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. Really good one. So as we understand it, the interpretation of the bill will be that the Water Services Organisation can develop their own development contributions policy, and Council will also retain a development contributions policy as well. How those two things interface is primarily going to be something that we will have to really consider in that transition agreement between when we're moving from a council activity into a water services activity. So there are two separate policies that are provided for, both for council to retain their own development contribution policy as well as one that the Water Services Organisation can also write.
Thank you. And you also mentioned about future development strategies, and it's our suggestion in the submission that the water entity adopt our future development strategy so that we can have alignment with our progress with growth. Do we know if other councils are suggesting the same thing, so that a water entity would have to adopt the future development strategies for the member councils and adhere to all of those?
I'm not sure about what other councils are considering, but certainly from our point of view, in terms of the conversations that we're having amongst our team, there is definitely consideration of this. We have spoken at length about potentially what needs to be included in the constitution for the new Water Services Organisation. It could be captured at that level. It could also be captured, as I mentioned, in the transition agreement between the council and the new Water Services Organisation. So there's a lot of fine detail obviously to be worked through, but that's where we're currently sitting at the moment.
Right. Thank you. So two extra ones. One was you mentioned this Section 172 requirement for stormwater network bylaws to be sent to the Water Services Authority for comment. Do we know to what end that step is for? Is it an extra bureaucratic step? Is it something we do already? I can find that if you like. That's point.
Yeah, we might come back to you on that one. We obviously have an extra expert in PNCC in Peter Ridge who has been advising Taumata Arawai in the bylaw space. So if that's a question you wish us to come back on, we can.
That would be great, thank you. And there was one further one which was along those lines. At page 334, which I think was point 3, Section 170 uniquely empowers water service providers to make bylaws for stormwater networks, unlike other water services where this authority is reserved for territorial authorities, and this represents a significant shift in lawmaking powers. Are there other precedents that we know of where bylaw authority has been given to an unelected institution?
Again, I think a question perhaps to come back to you from Peter. I certainly think that this is a unique situation in terms of what councils are dealing with in that bylaw space. The submission you'll see, we have tried to get better clarity in the bill to help us all understand that, because there are some things that are not particularly clear in that space, but happy to come back to you on that.
Thank you very much. Excellent submission. Thanks.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you both. Just a question around the good governance arrangements component of the submission. There's an indication in there that the water organizations would have autonomy to subcontract and enter major contracts without shareholder approval. I just wondered if you could explain a little bit about what is in the legislation about those matters currently and what kind of implications that has for a community.
So what it basically is implying is that the legislation currently, as it's written, there are bits in it that do not give us the confidence that the autonomy piece is actually real. So from the point of view of, when you read parts of the legislation, it indicates to you that councils still have got ability in terms of being a shareholder in the water services organisation. And then further through the document, it then provides for some areas that are not as clear. So that's really what we're seeking to understand in terms of what we are suggesting in the submission. What implication, I guess, ultimately that might mean for council if it doesn't become clearer, would be that when we are making decisions, when council are making decisions as a shareholder council for the water services organisation, that's where that clarity piece becomes very problematic. I think we've had experience of that before, where a board of directors or a council-controlled organisation, there are some disparities between people's understanding. So what we're looking for here is just to provide some extra clarity on where that decision-making piece actually sits in the current bill.
Thank you. So, I mean, as the current bill is drafted, are they in fact council-controlled organizations if they can just go off and contract without any accountability back to the people that are actually paying the bills?
Yeah, that's the point we're trying to make here, that we can't actually, there is not that clarity in there for us to actually read it and go, that makes a whole lot of sense to us. So, yeah, what we're seeking is for the wording in that document to be made more explicit around where does the level of influence and control actually sit within the document.
Great, thank you for the submission, in particular that component. Mr. Mayor.
So just further to the councillor's questions, don't CCOs do that already? Doesn't the Regent, doesn't the airport contract to different organisations already?
Yes, there is provision in the bill for obviously that to occur. So yeah. Yes, there are other CCOs examples, as you say, that are already doing that. Yeah. The point here though is that it is not particularly clear for us to understand how those decisions are actually made and at what level in the organisation are they made. Where is the council as a shareholder in that CCO? Where is their ability to influence in that? That's, I think, what we're trying to get across here in the submission.
Okay. All right. Good. Okay. Well, look, we have the recommendation there. Thanks, Julie. Thanks, Mike. The council agreed to the submission on the Local Government Water Services Bill Attachment 1. I'm happy to move it, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Appreciate the, I think the detail obviously is in the appendix and quite detailed, and I like the layout of the recommendations are all in bold, which is good. So hopefully they get acknowledged and hopefully implemented as well, or at least some of the most important ones. So with no other speakers, I'll look to a vote, please. And that has passed 15 votes for, none against. Okay, we move through now to number 12, which is submission on the Treaty of Waitangi Principles Bill. And that's page 341. Invite Todd to speak to that. Kia ora, Todd. Page 341.
Aroha mai. Tēnā koe, Mr. Mayor, tēnā koutou nā kai kaunihira. E te tī, e te tā, tēnā tātou katoa. Huri taku mihi kia rātou mā, kia koutou e pēhi ana ki te mate i tēnei wā, nō reira ki te honga wairua ahare atu rā koutou moi mai o ki oki mai, rātou kia rātou, tātou kia tātou, tēnā tātou katoa. Councillors, lead the report as read, primarily. All I would add is that last week we received notification that some of the submitters who have places that were accepted to present are forgoing some of those times. So they have put out a message to us and others that there may be opportunities if the council still wishes to appear in front of the Justice Committee to present. And I believe that notification will come through governance. But that's the only additional comment I'll add in terms of the memo. Kia ora tātou.
Great, thank you, Todd. Obviously our submission's gone in and we're just waiting for those details. So there are no further questions, so thanks, Todd. The recommendation to Council, it's around receiving their memorandum titled Submission on the Treaty of Waitangi Principles Bill. I'm happy to move that, seconded by Deputy Mayor. We're well over the top of that one, so sorry, I was going to say we're going to vote, but there is a speaker, the Deputy Mayor.
Tēnā koe, Your Worship. Just to say how delighted I was to read that, so ngā mihi to staff and to obviously my councillor colleagues for your support, which is on this pivotal submission. I was a bit disappointed that we'd been invited to go down and give an oral submission, but that was like only a day or two notice, and I know for myself I was at a funeral, so just sharing that, but I'm really delighted that with the content of this and how it is, and ngā mihi ki a koutou. Kia ora, thank you.
Kia ora. Right, we will vote, please. Has passed 11 votes for and 4 against. Thank you. All right, we move through to number 13, which is our Arena Master Plan Steering Group. And I invite John Lynch, who's made it in the nick of time. Welcome, John. And this is on page 347, John. Right hand side.
Good afternoon, councillors. John Lynch, Manager Venues and Events. Today's paper is really a reasonably simple one, I think, and I'll take it as read. But it's really just asking for the Arena Master Plan Steering Group to be reconvened, because they've been in a bit of hiatus for a good part of probably 2.5 years now since the completion of the entrance plaza and bridge. The paper was also just to give councillors some level of clarity, I suppose, that there has been work being undertaken in the background with our key stakeholders, and infrastructure and strategic planning and the venues and events have been working collaboratively to start putting together a strategic design brief to go to market with.
Great, thanks, John. Again, take the paper as being read. And, hold on, we have got some questions. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks, John. I see in the terms of reference it says the group does not hold any delegations and has no authority to make decisions or commitments on behalf of council. Now, that was the case previously, but there were occasions when that steering group did make decisions and make commitments on behalf of council. So how could we be sure that that won't be happening again?
I think it's fair to say that that point needs to be probably clarified at the first steering group meeting. The steering group is really there to give some direction and advice and to be the conduit back to the full council.
So there's a reporting back mechanism of reporting back every 6 months to the Culture and Sport Committee.
Yes.
I guess if we're to support the reconvening of this steering group, some of us will need to feel reassured that there won't be any decision making occurring, having been bitten once, if you know what I mean. We might be twice shy. So if they're only reporting back every 6 months, if there are any decisions that need to be made, how will they come to council? Through a separate paper?
That would certainly be my intention, and I would work with the steering group, of which there's 4 councillors and the mayor sitting within that steering group. So yes, I would do it directly.
Okay, thank you.
So can I just ask, what were the decisions that the steering group made separate of council? Can anybody, Councillor Naylor?
There were some quite significant assumptions made about bringing the years 4, 5 and 6 of the LTP funding forward to years 1 and 2, and that assumption was made prior to that coming to council. Eventually it did come to council, but some of us had to advocate very strongly for that to occur, because the steering group had ran away with doing all the design and everything, making that assumption before that funding did come through council.
Correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't know if there's somebody here in offices, but my understanding is the council made that decision, not the steering group. The steering group made a recommendation, but I'm getting nods that people that were on the steering group. Yeah, I know, and if somebody can pull the minutes out for us of a council meeting and just find out if the steering group made that decision or did council make that decision. Because, we're making some assumptions around the table here. Councillor Naylor.
Just following on from those questions from Councillor Johnson, I also had some similar questions, but one of them is the meetings that happen monthly, will the minutes of those meetings be made available to all elected members?
I don't see any issue with that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Just a request that in terms of looking at past performance of the steering group, if we do get to the point of pulling minutes of council, that we also pull minutes of the steering group.
Absolutely. Yep, sure. Okay, thanks, John. So we've got a recommendation to council that we reconvene the Arena Master Plan Steering Group and agree the attached terms of reference. I'm happy to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Look, councillors, we've got obviously 2 versions of what went on, and it'd be good to get that clarified. I do know there was a level of dissatisfaction with some councillors that thought there was some decision-making going on, so we I think we actually added the Chair of Finance to the group, hence there was 4 on it. And I think you'll find that there was recommendations made, which probably got conceived as being decisions, but we couldn't make decisions, we didn't have the authority. But anyway, it did a good job in the sense that it ring-fenced, if you can recall, the budget blowouts that were in front of council, and we held the line on that for everybody. So I think it's a good thing, and I think in terms of the delegations that it doesn't have authority to make decisions, but it can help. It can help bring things together, and a recommendation that comes back to council for decision making. So I hope you support it. Councillor Naylor.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor, and I'm happy to support this. And certainly there are a variation of recollections of what happened previously. And I can confirm that the Mayor is correct that eventually those decisions did come to the council. It wasn't till after some very strong advocating behind the scenes when some of us recognised that the steering group were running well ahead of where council had authorised transfers of funds from outer years. And so for that reason I am really pleased that, as the Mayor has said, one of the outcomes of that was that the Chair of Finance was included in that steering group, and I'm pleased that that is still the case. But because of that history, I think we do need to be cautious that those decisions come back and that there is regular reporting. So I feel that we have had that assurance today. What it also, my reflections on that, in bringing years 4, 5 and 6 of the 21 to 31 LTP funding forward into the earlier years, what is interesting to note is that now that we're in 24, 25, 26, the first 3 years of the next LTP, we also, the same things happened again where the outer years funding has come forward, and we have only just had 17.4 million invested, as this report highlights, only in 2021, not so long ago. So I acknowledge that we have approved some significant funding in the first 3 years of this LTP, and I urge the steering group certainly not to run ahead of that.
Deputy Mayor.
Kia ora, Your Worship, and everyone. I just want to stand probably to say something quite different to Councillor Naylor and what you possibly might I'm going to say, but just to say how absolutely proud I am of Arena and John, ngā mihi kia koe, and all your staff. But I saw something on TV about 3 nights ago that showed a city. I won't identify it. They might not let me in there again if I go there. But they've spent, invested a considerable amount of money and have got this sort of huge complex similar to ours, but with a big range of things, and that's good to see for them. However, I do know that we probably have an advantage over many places, given that we're geographically located in central. We not only provide for the region a multiple of facilities for basketball, speedway, hockey, rugby, you know, you name it. But I'd like to see us maintain that advantage, because that brings in business, that brings in people. Having looked at the speedway the other day, I drove around town and I was just so thrilled to see the amount of vehicles parked up on by the skateboard area and so forth. And I know that there's a vibrancy that comes when we have people coming to the arena. And I've heard nothing but good things. And I speak to a lot of people, particularly in educational facilities, who come here for the national games and so forth, and they just speak glowingly of it. So it is a jewel, one of our jewels in our crown here in Palmerston North. And even though I'm not on that group, I'm very excited that we have that and the work ahead that you'll progress. And keeping in mind what Councillor Naylor said, I agree with that too. Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora, thanks to the Deputy Mayor. We'll now vote, please. Has passed, 14 votes for and none against. Right, we move through to number 14, which is paper from governance, and it's around the order of candidates' names on voting papers for 2025 elections. That's on page 355. Okay, Hannah, over to you.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Welcome to local election year, elected members. This report before you, for those of you who have not seen one before, is a decision that you can make for every election as to how you'd like to see candidates ordered on the Palmerston North electoral papers. Bring it to you now, but the actual public notice of how it will be done will happen in August at the same timing as the list of who will be nominated for the election. Your previous resolutions, the last 5 elections, you've used random order. What isn't in the report but came to my attention, I managed to get hold of the data last week, was the trend of other councils over that same period. So in 2016, we were one of 29 city or district councils who were using random order. By 2022, we were one of 49. So there's now 73% of city and district that are doing that, and 8 out of the 11 regional councils are using random order at their last resolution, and that included Horizons Regional Council as well, which you'll be aware also on our voting papers. The pros and cons are set out in the paper, but I'm happy to take any other questions.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Hannah. A couple of quick questions. Is it possible for council to make a more enduring decision rather than just having to revisit this every time?
The Act says that if you don't make a decision, it will default to alphabetical. And so on consulting with our electoral officer, his recommendation was that you make one for clarity.
Thanks. The other things that'll be ordered onto the votes or voting papers are around the referendum. I just wondered, do we have any information yet about like the layout of that? Will the referendum vote kind of be front and center and then names and everything down below, or the other way around?
There's no finalisation of that yet. However, I've been discussing it, certainly with the Electoral Reference Group, which puts forward the recommendation of what the voting papers will look like to the DIA. At this stage, we've been able to have some influence over what the wording in that referendum might look like, and I've recommended at this point that we would like to see the 2 referenda lined up in a way that it doesn't affect the confusion between, potential confusion between STV and FPP, because a voter on our papers will be moving between the 2. So either we'll have, I'm aiming that we'll have mayoral and then councillors for PNCC, and then potentially the referendum and then Horizons, or Horizons and then both referendums, but there wouldn't be a FPP, STV, FPP kind of mix going on. That's as far as we've got so far.
Thanks. And finally, just in terms of understanding the timing of that decision around the wording of the question in the referendum, do we have any update or information on when that will be publicly available?
I don't have any dates. My understanding is that the Electoral Reference Group has made a recommendation to the DIA, and it's with them at the moment.
So what's the latest possible date that could come out would be literally publication of the papers?
Yeah, it would be, the latest logistically would be August.
All right, thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Hannah. Maybe I'm missing something, but I know we're having a referendum on Māori wards. What's the second one that you're referring to? You said both referenda a few
Oh,
times.
so the same voting papers also include Horizons, so Horizons also must have a referendum on whether they keep their Māori constituencies.
Oh, okay, thank you.
So they're two separate questions.
All right. Thank you, Hannah. Okay, we have a recommendation to council that council agree the following order of arranging names of candidates on voting documents for Pastoral City Council pursuant to the Local Electoral Regulations Act, and I'm happy to move C, random order. That was seconded. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yeah, I don't think it needs much explanation, so I'll leave it at that. If there's no other comments, we will vote, please. That's passed, 15 votes for and none against. Okay, we move through to number 15, which is around our new Heritage Reference Group, appointment of a council member to that, or council representative. It's on page 361 of your papers from governance. I'll take it as being read. Are there any questions of officers? Being none, I'll look to move that council appoint Councillor Rachel Bowen as the council's representative on the Heritage Reference Group until October 2025, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. And you won't make any decisions, will you, Councillor, before we comes back to council? All right, thank you. We will vote, please. Okay, that's passed 14 votes for with 1 abstention. All right, moving through to the council work schedule on page 16. And sorry, on page 16, number 16, it's page 363. It's been a long day. We went through this last week, but are there any matters arising from that? Being none, I'll recommend that we receive the work schedule dated the 12th of February 2025. I'll look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. No comments, we will vote, please. Has passed, 15 votes for and none against. Right, brought our meeting towards close. So if I can invite the Deputy Mayor to close the meeting.
Sorry, Your Worship, I'm just smiling when you said to close our lovely meeting. I don't think I've heard you say that before. Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko mutua a mātou mahi, mō tēnei wā, our work is finished for the moment. Manaki tia mātou katoa, may we all be looked after. O mātou whānau, o mātou pua, te hāpore katoa. May our family, may our friends, may our entire community be looked after. Ai o ki te rangi, and may peace in the universe continue or happen. Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora. Thank you, everybody. Right, a very quick coffee break, because I know people want to get out of here. We've got a parking framework